We had 77 objections, one last witness, and a whole lot of snark today in court. It is Wednesday, June 11th, and we just wrapped up day 31 in Karen Reed's second trial. Now, Dr. Rentschler was back on the stand to finish his direct testimony. Y'all, this is the kind of expert that I love to see on the stand. He's very clear and easy to follow, and he backs up all of his opinions with science and data. Dr. Rentschler pointed out that Welcher's PowerPoint was actually incorrect when he called the injuries to John O'Keefe's arm lacerations. They're actually superficial abrasions. And this has been testified to and diagnosed by all of the medical professionals in this case. Then Dr. Rentschler showed x-rays of John O'Keefe's arm and hand, showing that there were no broken or fractured bones or trauma. He also looked at the holes in the sleeve of John O'Keefe's hoodie and pointed out that there are 36 different points of impact with the skin on John O'Keefe's arm, but only 9 defects to the sleeve. So he doesn't think that it lines up. Now, one of the parts that I found the most interesting about his testing is the visuals that he did to show the direction of the wounds on John O'Keefe's arm, if his arm had been bent the way that Welcher was showing when he was holding that drink. Now, this is around the 1 hour and 15-minute mark into the live stream today. Y'all, I definitely recommend going and checking that part out. It was really, really interesting. It shows that the taillight couldn't have really scratched John O'Keefe's arm in that way because the injuries are going in different directions. The visual was really effective. Now, Dr. Rentschler also talked about the testing that he and Dr. Wolf did at the different speeds to test the damage to the taillight and the arm. And he explained that the ones with just the arm hanging where the car was backing up into it, those were to test like a side swipe type collision. And the ones with Rescue Randy were for center mass impact testing, which is what caused Rescue Randy to get road rash. Rescue Randy became Road Rash Randy. Now, hearing the science and physics behind why ARCA came to the conclusions was actually really helpful, and it was super easy to follow. Another huge point that I think was incredibly important was brought up by Dr. Rentschler on direct.
You look at the arm itself, and we're looking at talking about the injuries and the abrasions compared to fractures. So if Mr. O'Keefe's arm was hit at 24, 29 miles an hour, what this suggests, and there were only abrasions, what this would suggest is that if the taillight doesn't cover or fracture, you can have your arm hit at 24 miles an hour and you wouldn't have any injuries at all, which from a biomechanical standpoint doesn't make sense.
Now, I know we've talked so much about the damage that we expect from that kind of impact, but hearing it explained this way, I think it was huge. Dr. Rentschler also pointed out that Dr. Welcher's testing didn't have any kind of science behind it. And it didn't really show anything about what would actually happen if the car were to make contact with an arm. He also brought up the article Welcher used that said head injuries are the most common in motor vehicle pedestrian impacts. And he said, that's not true. That article is from 46 years ago, before they were even making SUVs. I don't know why Welcher thought it was a good idea to use that. Also, remember when Alessi kept asking Dr. Welcher about the amount of force it would take to break the bones in your hand? He was super evasive about answering it. But finally, he said that the bones in your hand would only break if it hit like the tailpipe or the spoiler. Well, it turns out Dr. Rentschler did some calculations on that and pretty much debunked it.
So for the metacarpal phalangeal joint, the knuckles, on average, it took 397 pounds of force to fracture that joint. Well, the 15-mile-an-hour test produced a minimum of 483 pounds. And more realistically, that's just with the hand weight. There's going to be more weight because it's attached to the wrist. More realistically, it's twice that, so it's around 900 pounds of force. But what these tests show is that the force produced on the hand, as represented by the PowerPoint from Aperture, even at 15 miles an hour and likely below that, you would expect to get fracture of the hand bones, of the knuckles, metacarpal interphalangeal joints, and the metacarpal bones if you contacted the rear of that vehicle at that speed.
In the end, Dr. Rentschler was able to say with a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, based on peer-reviewed articles and testing, that a side swipe would not push you 8 to 10 feet into the yard, and the taillight couldn't have caused the damage to John's arm. Hank came out mad. He started out by spending a lot of time focusing on details that are unrelated to Dr. Rentschler's direct testimony, like questioning him on things like the sequestration order and last year's trial. And the way he did it was frustrating. He kept asking about Dr. Rentschler being talked to about the case. And Dr. Rentschler said that he was told some things, but it was by the entity who hired him, as in the FBI. But he's not allowed to tell the jury that it was the FBI. And that's so frustrating because Hank is trying to give the impression to the jury that the ARCA witnesses did something wrong when they didn't. Now, the two sparred throughout the entirety of Hank's cross. There was an ongoing theme of Hank making comments, which is a problem, especially for a prosecutor. The thing is, prosecutors are not allowed to take little jabs like that at witnesses. And Hank is normally a defense attorney. For defense attorneys, it isn't such a huge deal, but for the prosecution, it is a risky move because it can be an appellate issue. It's deliberate, it's inappropriate, and it is repeated. Jackson objected each time that Hank would pull this nonsense, and Judge Cannoni asked Hank Brennan to stop making those comments at least 2 or 3 times.
I want you to be detailed. I don't want you to guess.
Objection, Your Honor. So without that preamp, go ahead and just ask the question, please.
Do you, since your memory is difficult,
Objection. Sustained. Okay.
Sure, it's broken like that, and I've never seen a case where you get these types of abrasions.
well, I didn't ask you that. Is that funny?
No, it's not funny.
Okay.
So I'm going to strike the comment. Next question. Next question, Mr. Brennan. No more comments.
It's really meaningless in his analysis and conclusions.
Now that you've shared your opinions, can I get back to my question?
Sustained. So, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Brent, I'm going to see counsel at sidebar.
Now, by the time Jackson got to the point where he's having to literally ask the judge to finally do something, to do anything to hold Brennan accountable for his repeated deliberate violation so that he will stop doing this in front of the jury, I think I would have been throwing chairs at that point. He had a lot more patience than I would have because this has been an ongoing cranky Hanky theme during all of his cross-examinations. But it didn't stop Hank.
Other than your opinion, let's get back to my question if I could.
I believe I answered at the beginning of that, sir.
I'm going to ask you again.
Now, Hank would continue to ask the same questions over and over, and Bev allowed it. So Dr. Rentschler tried to help Hank out by making sure that he heard him this time.
That wasn't done in this case, was it?
What? It wasn't necessary.
Was that done in this case?
It wasn't. I'll speak slower and a little clearer.
Maybe if you answer my question.
I just did answer it. I said it wasn't.
When Hank did behave long enough to actually get some answers out of Dr. Rentschler, he had a lot to say. Hank kept pushing about why ARCA did their testing with the arm positioned the way that Welcher's was in his paint test. And maybe that's because ARCA just completely debunked Welcher's testing. So Hank told Dr. Rentschler that he was just assuming that Welcher was saying that the hand was in that position. And y'all, his response, it was perfect. No notes.
When I did that, there was one test with the arm like this. That's the only evidence that was presented in his opinion or in his case. I evaluated that. I have not seen any other explanation of what happened or how it occurred. Specifically, Dr. Welcher said in his report on page 9, he said, I have conducted an accident reconstruction and biomechanical engineering analysis of this matter. If he did not recreate how he was positioned, if he did not determine the speed of impact, if he did not determine how Mr. O'Keefe's body moved, if he did not determine where he ended up, then he did not conduct either an accident reconstruction analysis or a biomechanical causation analysis. He did nothing of the sort.
When Rentschler referred to that report again later, he even talked about the test, which is apparently irrelevant. That's how he said it. The test, which is apparently irrelevant. It was so funny and also accurate. With every hypothetical that Hank threw out trying to make the Commonwealth's theories work, Dr. Rentschler told him, you're just making suppositions. And that led to the one clip that not only shows Hank trying to misstate what Dr. Rentschler said, but also shows Dr. Rentschler shutting it down and summing it all up.
Can you answer that?
I mean, I guess you could somehow predict or have a possibility of almost anything happening. You could say someone could get hit by a car and do a couple of somersaults into the yard. I mean, there's no evidence of that, so it's just supposition, but I won't say it's impossible.
You think John O'Keefe did somersaults into the front yard of 34 Fairfield? Is that what you're telling us, Doctor?
No, I don't think he even got hit by the car, sir.
That's not what I'm asking.
Now, on redirect, Jackson asked Dr. Rentschler about something that Brennan was referring to on cross. And Brennan mentioned they provided some information to Rentschler in the last trial. This is all about that sequestration order. Jackson wanted to know who they were. He said, was it us, the defense team? And Rentschler said no. Was it your employer, ARCA? No. It was actually a past client who just happens to be the FBI. For those who aren't familiar, last year there was a federal investigation into how Karen Reed's case was handled. And the FBI hired ARCA, the crash daddies, last year before the defense used them as expert witnesses. Neither side can bring up the federal investigation. So AJ had to, of course, kind of skirt around it and not let the jury know who that information actually came from. Now, our chat in the live stream today counted the objections. And y'all, the numbers that we came up with were pretty wild. So here's what we found. Hank objected around 31 times, and we counted 29 that were sustained. AJ objected like 46 times, and we counted 16 that were sustained. Y'all, that's 94% compared to 35%, and that is pretty crazy. There were a few more small questions from each side, and then Dr. Rentschler was free to go, meaning the defense rests. Now, the jurors were released a bit early, and Bev and the attorneys had a few details to hammer out before the end of the day, including the defense wants the PowerPoint from Dr. Rentschler in as evidence. Right now, it's just being used as a demonstrative. That's why they were able to show it. They want it in as evidence, and Hank doesn't want it in. So they are going back and forth about that. Now, the most important thing that we learned is that the Commonwealth will not present any sort of rebuttal. No Welcher. Welcher's not coming back. That was actually surprising to me. But we did a poll this morning in the live chat asking if you think it's a good idea for Welcher to come back, especially given the whole thing with the x-rays and having to follow up after Dr. Rentschler. And the majority said they wouldn't call him either. So interesting. Now, the attorneys also agreed on doing the charge conference tomorrow at 10 a.m. So no jurors will be present for that, and it will be a half day. A charge conference is basically where each side goes over the proposed jury instructions, and they kind of argue back and forth about what they want in and what they want out. So that will be tomorrow, and we will live stream that. And we will have closing arguments on Friday. Y'all, this is huge. This will all be in the jury's hands in a couple of days. I'll be on Court TV again Friday night after closing arguments with Vinnie Politan talking about the case. So check us out. We are almost at the finish line, y'all. What are you thinking? How are you feeling? Let me know in comments. And if you want a breakdown of everything happening in court, be sure to check out 13th Juror Podcast every week. And we will see you tomorrow, 10 a.m. right here on Crime Junkie Jury.